With everything going on between the California wildfires and the air quality, there's a lot to talk about, so let's just dive straight in. First thing we'll talk about is the air quality, and I would say there's some good and bad news. Some of the good news is this thick layer of smoke, you can almost see it being pushed south like a wave. And the reason for that is really due to these upper level winds that you can see are pushing straight north to south. So that is some good news for future days since this thick smoke is no longer over Northern California and the Bay Area. Air quality will likely improve in the next couple of days. Where the bad news comes in is some of that smoke that used to be up in the high altitudes has now dropped down to the surface. So what that's doing is creating some poor air quality, and you can see it's very unhealthy to even hazardous, especially around the Creek Fire, the North Complex, and the August Complex. And then basically that unhealthy air is covering all of Northern California and even working into some of the southern areas of the state. The good news is, though, is in the forecast, things are likely to improve. And I know this is what I said yesterday, and then today looks pretty bad, but now that that thick smoke is being pushed south, I believe the air quality should be getting better within the next couple of days. So that is some great news there. Now, the first fire I want to talk about is the Creek Fire, and there's some interesting things going on with this one. The main areas that we're going to be looking at are the southern edge, where you can see this map shows fire perimeter and hotspots, and you can see that the southern edge is still actively burning, and especially into this timber. So this green coloring represents the timber, the forest, and that's where really some of the explosive fire behavior has been with this fire. The good news is, though, as we work into this brush and grassland, this fire is really going to calm down in this area as we're in lighter fuels that don't lead to as intensive burning. So that'll certainly help firefighters get some lines in down here to really stop this fire in its tracks before it moves into populated areas like Auberry. Now, kind of the opposite thing is happening on this northern edge where the dead fuels, dead timber are still part of this area. So that fire is continuing to progress to the north. So when we talk about that dead fuels, here's Shaver Lake and Auberry. And if we look at the tree mortality, you can see one CAL FIRE representative said we've had 80 to 90% of the trees in this area have been killed by the bark beetle. So that's really what's been driving this fire. Again, the main priority for CAL FIRE right now, though, is really getting some containment on the southern edge. So one cool thing we can look at, this is a new map for you guys. This is the WRF S-Fire computer model. It's one of the top wildfire models in the world. It was developed by Adam Kochansky, who is faculty at San Jose State, and I'm fortunate enough to say I learned from him. And if we actually go in here, it's a great example of how spotting occurs in a fire. So if we zoom in, you'll notice this is from yesterday. So that finger that comes off right here hasn't burned yet. But if we turn this on, it is a great example of how spot fires work. You get wind that starts a fire here, and then we're going to see how that leads to some rapid fire spread. So we got the spot, and then the winds are flowing together, and then you see that rapid acreage burned. Another interesting thing to point out is where you have a valley or a canyon, the winds can flow down it and really lead to rapid spread. So this is a pretty awesome computer model. This is one of the few models that actually pairs up the fire and the atmosphere above to really get a dynamic view of how this fire is spreading. Now, if we actually get into the numbers with the Creek Fire, there's one thing to note. You can see it's up to 175,000 acres, and it's tempting to say, oh, that's pretty good. It hasn't increased too much in the last couple of days. But part of the reason for that is actually due to this air quality. I heard one CAL FIRE representative say they haven't been able to get a good estimate of the new fire perimeter because the smoke has been so thick over this area. So I'm going to be interested once that quality infrared data comes in, we're most likely going to get a big jump in this acreage. The good news with this one, we are up to 6% containment, And as always, when it comes to evacuations, the link is in the description. So some of the bad news, we are up just 361 structures destroyed. So as always, my thoughts and prayers go out to everyone affected by this fire. We now have over 1,300 personnel. There are 24 crews, 23 helicopters, 142 engines, 60 dozers, and 39 water tenders. So these numbers are up from what they were yesterday. We're likely going to see that continue throughout the week as more and more resources come to this fire. So when we actually get into the forecast, there's some good and bad news with this one as well. You can see the temperatures are going up, but they're not in the triple digits. It's nothing too extreme, but temperatures are going up, so that's not exactly what we want to see. Some of the good news is, though, the winds, while they are moderate today, they should be kind of tapering off tomorrow. So how that's going to help is what we were just talking about with those spot fires. That's really where wind picks up a burning ember, puts it elsewhere, and then that new fire starts. So tomorrow, the possibility of the new spot fires starting is going to be reduced. The bad news has to do with this humidity. You can see in the overnight hours, humidity usually goes up to maybe 50, 60, all the way to 90%. But you can see in this area, it's just staying in the 30s all night. And what that's allowing the fire to do is continue having rapid fire spread through the nighttime hours, which are typically when firefighters can usually get a handle over these blazes. Looking at this forecast, I would say the major area of concern is the afternoon today, where we see it's going to be pretty warm. We have relatively gusty winds and then a low relative humidity. Again, the reason humidity is important is because if you have dry air, the vegetation gets dry, and then the fire can burn faster. So the next fire I want to talk about is the North Complex. This is also referred to as the Bear Complex, or the Bear Fire. It was two fires that combined into one. And if we actually go in here, you can see that the southern edge of this fire is pushing further and further into Lake Orville. And you can see there are still some hot spots in this area. So I know that is the top priority for CAL FIRE at this point. Really get some containment and some lines around this to protect these populated areas. One other area is on this, in the northern and western edge. You can see it's pushing closer to the town of Paradise. And what I heard one CAL FIRE representative say is they're actually reusing some of the containment lines and bulldozer lines that they previously had made for the campfire. So it'll be interesting to see if some of those lines come into play to stop some of this fire spread. So looking at the numbers for the North Complex, we are now up to 244,000 acres. This is 23% contained, and there are 3,000 personnel on this fire. So there are a lot of people. That's up from yesterday, and I'm sure when we look at this number tomorrow, it will continue to rise. So looking at the forecast for this area, you can see there's a lot of haze. That's because that smoke has really dropped down to the surface. This is one of the hazardous air quality areas. And you can see the temperatures here are basically hovering around the 90s. And when we look at the winds, I would say the area of concern for this forecast is going to be tomorrow afternoon, where you see it gets up to 91. We get that afternoon uptick in winds, and then relative humidity drops into the low to mid 20s. So that's probably the area we're going to have to look at for the North Complex and how it's going to develop in the future. So the next fire I want to look at is the August Complex, and a pretty interesting thing happened with the August Complex really within the last 24 hours. So this is what used to be the August Complex. This is what used to be the Elkhorn Fire, and you can see that these two fires have actually combined into one giant fire. So when I show you the numbers for this fire, you're going to see it went way up because they're now calling this entire thing just the August Complex. So I'll remind you, this started a couple weeks ago, back when Tropical Storm Fausto just funneled all that moisture into Northern California, created the hundreds of lightning fires across the state. And this was 37 fires that you now can see have just combined into one giant one. So I know the priority for both CAL FIRE and the US Forest Service, they're doing a joint command, is going to be on this western and northern edge of this fire. If we actually get into the numbers, yeah, exactly. It's up to almost 750,000 acres. That is the largest fire number I have ever seen in my life. It's almost double the previous largest wildfire in California history. So the personnel is at 1,000. You'll notice, you might be thinking, why is this the largest fire and there's less personnel on it than the North Complex? And that's because this fire is burning in less populated areas. So you can see it is up to 25% containment, so at least that's some good news. And again, this is the #1 largest wildfire in the history of California, almost 750,000 acres. It'll be interesting to see if this one actually gets to 1,000,000 acres. I've never heard of a 1,000,000-acre fire before, so we certainly hope that does not happen. Two things to note: the SCU and LNU lightning complex wildfires, which I talked a lot about the last couple of weeks, have significantly calmed down, and CAL FIRE is saying they hope to get full containment on these fires by this weekend, or throughout the weekend. So that's some great news there. Some of the more bad news is with the North Complex. You can see that's now pushed up to the 9th largest wildfire in the history of California, and the Creek Fire has now moved up to number 16. So you can see these fires keep changing every single day. I'm going to keep you guys updated with daily forecasts and updates on all these wildfires. And as always, my thanks goes out to CAL FIRE, the US Forest Service, for all the amazing work they've been doing, as well as San Jose State and Dr. Craig Clements, and Adam Kachansky as well, for creating this amazing weather model that is certainly going to help us in the future. So my thoughts and prayers go out to everybody affected by these fires, and thanks for watching.